Charles Hart were acclaimed throughout London for our performances. Methinks myself, sir, it was because I was put in the breeches parts and displaying the acting. It could be. Yes, oh, little Saskia. Yes, well, she was a little lively with me, I must confess.
Oh, it's all this kind of
Yes, and there were things to tug upon and so forth. Oh, where was that?
To Sir William West, a good break, 2 points. Sir William West, 2 points, good break. And again, Sir Arthur Coote struck his opponent in the head. No points again. It is perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, that being foreign, he didn't hear the rules. So we'll just say it very slowly and very loudly in English. Don't hit the head. Bless him. It's not that I don't like foreigners. Sir William, Sir Arthur gives his apologies for that blow, although it is his second in this contest. 2 falls and a submission. Your second pass, gentlemen. So Sir Arthur grasping another once. Aim lower, boy, aim lower. And this is it! Ollie! Away, Lendl is going right into the tilt. I think Sir Arthur caught his leg on the tilt. I believe that resulted in a miss for both knights. And I'm unsure that Sir William's lances being a little over-weakened. However, he gained nothing from it himself. Sir, my horse went wide. My opponent didn't have a proper target. I beg you, give him the point. Sir Arthur's being very chivalrous in trying to make amends for the head blow he delivered. He says his horse was a smidgen wide, and therefore denied Sir William a target in any event. He requests that Sir William is given the points for a strike nevertheless. Ladies and gentlemen, sportsmanship and chivalry being brought to you on this field. Modern sportsmen ought to take note. So is that an extra point to Sir William, sir? An extra point to Sir William for a foul. Well done, lad. Then let us see. Each knight has passed twice against each other. How the scores thus rest. So, ladies and gentlemen, the young lady to the side of me has been doing the clever job of counting for me. And in final place, with 2 points, young Sir Arthur Coote. Come over from the long-legged lowlander. In second place, with 7 points, Sir William West, the beast of Bolsover. Very well done. last round, stepping out of Sir William's way. Sir Stephen Merritt with a healthy 8 points, ladies and gentlemen.
You'll be lucky to be alive at the end of the second jump. He only picked me in the push.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, he's getting very fiery, isn't he? Deary me. Gentlemen, you have 3 lances to run in a separate contest to say who stands as victor. If in the event of there being no difference in scores for these 3 passes, they will be added to your current score. So Stephen could end up in the lead if this is level. However, 3 lances to see what comes. So, gentlemen, arm yourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready for the first of the 3 final passes.
Let's say, olé!
They're away, they're coming into the lists. They're leveling lances. My God, there's blood everywhere, ladies and gentlemen.
A good strike each, 2 points to each knight.
2 points to each knight and a double break. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, this is fine sport today that we're seeing. My God, you can see the dents in Sir Stephen's armour as he rides past. They're taking some hard hits today.
Second of the 3 passes, gentlemen. Arm yourselves.
Sir William West just adjusting his eyes there. A few words to his squire. Probably not kind ones. So yes, they're just locking his visor back into position. Sir Stephen gently talking to his squire, handing in the lance. Just look how relaxed he is on his white charger, isn't it? Oh, it just brings a tear to your eye. And of course, at the other end, we've got the bombastic, the ever-cross Sir William West, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's say,
And they're away! They're going into the list! The lances are down! It looks good, but I don't know!
strike again, 2 points again to each knight.
Both knights are a double break! Huzzah! So, it all rests on this final pass. We have the different schools of knighthood here. The calm, the collected, the gentle, Sir Stephen Merritt. The fiery, the warlike, the bloody, the beast of Bolsover, Sir William West. Who's for Sir Stephen? Who's for Sir William? Oh, the crowd is equally split, ladies and gentlemen, as are the points. They're on!
Let's say,
They're away! They're going to get all the lances going down the wrong target! There's wood everywhere!
a good strike again to each knight. 2 points to each.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's gone equally. We've just got to add up the scores. So, 6 points to Sir Stephen Mallet. 6 points to Sir William West. This means that with the points difference on the last runs added, that our winner today is Sir Stephen Merritt! Oh, Sir William West is not particularly happy. Don't worry, my dear. He can't hurt you. I'll defend you with my stick. Go on, be gone, be gone. You be gone. Why, you be gone. Go away, sir. Well done, Sir Stephen. Well done. Good sport. So, ladies and gentlemen, your champion for this morning, Sir Stephen Merritt, huzzah! We will have more jousting for you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Not only will we have more jousting for you, we'll have an extra night. So 4 nights in this afternoon's joust, ladies and gentlemen. Be there or miss it.
Let's go around like that. I'm going to do one lap.
That's absolute rubbish. If you can afford spices and sugar, you're not going to be eating rotting meat. By the very nature of the fact these recipes are written down, these are high status recipes. These are banqueting recipes, posh dinner parties if you like. And if you're having people coming around that you want to demonstrate, you want to show off to, you want them to know how rich you are, if you have sugar, you will put it in everything. There's no distinction between sweet and savoury. there will be meat dishes, pork dishes with sugar in it, with fruit in it. As I say, there isn't the set distinction between sweet and savoury like we have now.
Rejecting the item, get the flies in there, get a good grip of it, and put it out again. Then we can sew the person up using a small needle and some horsehair thread. We can stitch them on. Horsehair is very good because it's very strong, and it will also naturally dissolve out the body. So it's really threaded to take it out again when you finish it, when you put stitches to it's all sad, take stitches out. And also will naturally decay throughout the body when the wound's healed. Now, a lot of medieval medicine is based on Celtic folklore and other things, things like toothache. They thought toothache was caused by worms that lived in your teeth. So to get rid of the worms, folklore says, take a candle, take a dish of water, hold your face over the candle, and when the worms get nice and warm, get drowsy, they fall asleep, fall into the water and they'll drown. Yep. The surgeon had a better way of dealing with the worms. What he do is heat a needle like this one, place it onto the tooth, push it in, and that will burn the worm out.
The different styles of doing the
Tiles, isn't it, when they
dance?
A relic of the fingers of St Harvey. Do we know the story of St Harvey? Well, again, he's not a very tall rabbit. Oh, right. Well, St Harvey was in fact another deacon of the early church, this time in Asia Minor, and the Roman governor held him in very high regard, knowing him to be an extremely good man. But the decree went out from the Emperor Diocletian that everyone must worship his bust as being that of a god. And obviously the Christians did not find themselves able to do this. So St Harvey, as the leader of the Christian community, was summoned to the governor, who informed him that because he was held in such high regard, he didn't need to worship the bust at all. As long as he just saluted the bust, then the governor would carry word to Rome that he had indeed worshipped it. But of course even that was not acceptable to St Harvey. But he did go up to the bust and he did salute it. But the manner of his salutation was so shocking to the Roman governor that he ordered that St Harvey should be torn limb from limb, starting with those digits with which he had saluted the statue of the Emperor Diocletian. And these are the very fingers with which St Harvey saluted the statue of the Emperor Diocletian.
Yeah, like it's in 4 moves in my direction. That's before.
I can't make that line again. I can't make that one.
That was just the starting wheel. That's what you use to start with. What we'll do when you get them all
That
in
one?
section, you've got to have
We'll go. No, I can't make that one again because that's just too simple.
And the idea is really to clear your
Now, because you've only got 3 left,
Okay. Now what we're going to do, this finger's going to take that loop, that finger's going to take that loop. Like that.
Yeah. I'm a 60-year-old.
I'll move like one.
There are static moves.
Behind it, just a minute.
So I kind of went in line with 18th century stuff.
Yeah.
Mainly from
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't usually berate crowds for not being loud enough, because usually you're very loud. But I, frankly, was a little bit disappointed in that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the greatest monarchs our country has ever known, presiding over the greatest empire the world has ever known. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, and please this time do it properly, give a big, big cheer for Queen Victoria! Now the diehards. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause there for our buglers from the diehards, please. Diehards now presenting arms. And believe me, a Martini Henry rifle is heavy. It's quite heavy to hold in this position. And Queen Victoria, sometimes she would stand and chat to the soldiers, the officers, and sometimes these poor soldiers would be presenting arms for 15, 20 minutes, even half an hour. Not an easy thing to do, ladies and gentlemen. I've done it, and I assure you it's not easy. And now, Her Majesty approaches the soldiers. These are soldiers that she knows well. The Middlesex Regiment is one of her favourite regiments. She has often inspected them upon parade. Talking to the bugler, and then a few gracious words with our sergeant. We don't actually have an officer present with the diehards today. We have a sergeant in command of this section. We do have an officer with hussars here today, ladies and gentlemen. Now the Queen moves along the ranks, and now to the rear file, or the rear rank, the end file. Meeting an old soldier there that she has known for many, many years, passing a few words, perhaps asking about his wife, his family, and he tells her all is well, Ma'am. See there Master Dominic very respectfully, having removed his cap, awaiting upon Her Majesty the Queen. Now the sergeant gives the command to go back to the shoulder, which I can assure you will be a great relief to our soldiers from the diehards. And now Her Majesty approaches the gentleman and the lady from the court, Master Dominic, Lady Caroline, and Lady Rebecca. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we can see the detachment of soldiers from the Middlesex Regiment, the old 57th Regiment, the diehards, as they prepare to leave our arena. So would you please give our red-coated soldiers of the Queen a very big round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. And now we can see our young riders, Master Dominic, Lady Rebecca, and Lady Caroline, as they give us one last display of their horsemanship or horsewomanship. Give them a big cheer, please, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely superb. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as Her Gracious Empire, Queen Victoria, leaves our display, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, again, our seating etiquette. If you're between the rope barriers and the chairs, please sit down on your bottom.
Today, are you? No. And you're writing a pro-Roman history, are you not?
As I say at the beginning of my first book, I write without either business or partiality, or from any motives to which I am far removed.
Quite. The only other written source we have about the Boudiccan revolt was by our other guest, dear Cassius.
Are they?
Are they? Now, you were born in roughly AD 150. That's 90 years after these events that was being covered just now. In Bithynia, or in modern-day Turkey, so you're not an eyewitness either.
No. But it is my desire to write a history of all the memorable achievements of the Romans, so that no one shall look in vain for any of the essential facts.
You worked as a government official for several Roman emperors, including Commodus, probably best known from his appearance in the film Gladiator.
And you accuse our histories of being fanciful?
Quite so. From this point onwards, then, you, Tacitus, and you, dear Cassius, are only going to speak in the words recorded in your books. Is that correct?
It is.
Well, we have one other guest here today, Howard Giles, event supremo and expert on the Roman army.
Right.
Hello there. I'm going to help out by discussing the tactics used by both sides during the battle.
Well, now, the first thing we need to know, then, is an overall picture of the early days of Roman Britain.
Imagine a country that is not united. Not a nation as we know today, but a patchwork of different tribes. Some friendly towards each other, some at war. Some are quite Romanized because of the trade with the continent, others deeply hostile to the Romans. So, not a united nation that could fight back against an invasion, but a patchwork of tribes that can be picked off one by one or enlisted as allies. This is exactly what Emperor Claudius did. He invaded with 50,000 men. Initially, there was probably no fighting at all because the kings in the southeast were very pro-Roman, probably even welcomed them. However, the further they went, the more contact they had with hostile tribes. There was a big battle at the river Medway against Caractacus and his rebels. Eventually, the tribes were driven back. The further west and north the Romans went, the harder it got. The fighting bogged down, and it was still going on years later. Guerrilla warfare broke out.
But things came to a head in the late 50s and early 60s AD. Suetonius Paulinus was the new military commander in Britain. He arrived in roughly AD 58. Now, what do we know about him, Howard?
He was a tough professional soldier, probably selected especially for the job because he was an expert on mountain warfare, which would be very, very useful in taking tribesmen on in the Welsh mountains where most of the resistance was centred. He had two successful campaigns there, and in the year AD 60 was engaged in campaigning in Anglesey against the Druids. A tough soldier, a good man, a firm man, just what you need in an emergency.
And how did he fare there?
Suetonius Paulinus' appeals and mutual encouragements not to quail before a troop of frenzied women, they bore the standards onwards and smote down all resistance.
All this later ruin was brought upon the Romans by a woman, a fact which in itself caused them the greatest
Go back to the
shame.
end. Go back to the end.
Well, we do rather like our queens.
Indeed, heaven gave them indications of the catastrophe beforehand, for at night there was heard cries and lamentations, though no mortal man had uttered the words or the groans. Houses were seen under the water in the river Thames, and the ocean between the island and Gaul once grew blood red at flood tide.
Yes.
This was the person who was chief in misfortune of rousing the natives and persuading them to fight the Romans, and the person who was thought worthy to be their leader, who directed the conduct of the entire war.
But what was she like, Howard?
Well, what we really know all comes from Tacitus and Dio Cassius, and not a lot really. She was tall, possibly a redhead, we don't know her. She was very aristocratic and regal. She was a queen. She was married with daughters. She was a great woman. She hoped to inherit her entire kingdom, but unfortunately her father had decided that the emperor would be a co-heir, asking for serious trouble here. And it meant when her father died, the Romans wanted their cut of the action. This enraged Boudica, and she tried to stop this happening, which only irritated the Romans even more. And eventually, it all spiraled downwards into open rebellion.
So what happened to her?
His wife, Boudica, was disgraced with cruel strife being transmitted to them by their ancestors.
Also, Decianus Catus, the procurator fiscal of Britain, demanded that monies lent by Claudius to the tribespeople should be paid back.
So, dear Cassius, they were putting excessive financial screws on the population.
Seneca, in the hope of receiving a good rate of interest, had lent to the islanders 40 million sesterces that they didn't want. Now he called in this loan all at once and resorted to severe measures in exacting it.
So, politically and financially, the Romans have broken with their own practices in an attempt to grab the land of the Iceni for themselves.
Uliga gathered the tribes together. Her own Iceni, the Trinovantes, also handled heavily by the Romans, and other tribes. Possibly as many as 200,000 people. Not an army, but people, armed and angry. Let's say 100,000 just to be conservative, but what an enormous war band. And what did they do? They targeted the nearest and perhaps the richest target of all, Colchester.
Why Colchester, Tacitus?
Well, what chiefly fired their indignation was the conduct of the veterans, lately planted as a colony at Camulodunum.
And what was the situation here?
This was the centre of the hated Roman veteran. This is where the Roman veterans were settled. It was where the Temple of Claudius stood, an insult to the British religions. Hunt the enemy, find out how many there are, what their intentions might be, and most important of all, report back. They're quite lightly armed, there's not many of them, it's not a heavy infantry force here, it's not designed to fight. Their job is to see the enemy and get out fast. You'll notice the auxiliary cavalry are mounted. They've got the long oval shields and the spears to stab down with. The auxiliary infantry coming up behind, very lightly armoured actually, and some the soldiers there with no armour at all. Probably tribesmen perhaps that have been brought in from the Rhine or somewhere like that, and it's their job to seek out the enemy.
But surely the Britons must have realised they were taking on far more than they could chew.
To overrun a colony without a single fortification to defend it did not appear to the incensed and angry Britons an enterprise that threatened either danger or difficulty.
Now you can see the British are charging into the Roman auxiliary infantry, who are horribly outnumbered. There's not enough of them to form a cohesive defensive force, and they're in serious trouble. The auxiliary cavalry aren't even staying to fight. Their orders are clear. Get out, what's happening, tell the news to the commander. They've gone, leaving the infantry to their fate. The infantry are being cut down, killed, wounded, and one or two have been captured, which is probably a fate worse than death.
So Tacitus, what happened at Colchester, and for that matter in London and St Albans?
The colonies had but a handful of soldiers. Their temple was strongly fortified, and there they hoped to make a stand. But no fosse was made, no palisade thrown up, nor were the women and such as were disabled by age or infirmity sent out of the garrison.
So what happened?
The barbarians laid waste the colonies with fire and sword.
And indeed? And indeed, you can still see the burnt layer of the Roman buildings of Colchester in London and St Albans if you dig below those three cities.
They wreaked indescribable slaughter. Those who were taken captive by the Britons were subjected to every form of outrage. They hung up naked the noblest and most distinguished women, and then cut off certain body parts and sewed them in their mouths, in order to make the victims appear to be eating them. Afterwards, they impaled the women on sharp skewers lengthwise through the entire body.
So nearly as bad as the crucifixion and torture you Romans practiced.
All this they did to the accompaniment of banquets and wanton behaviour and sacrifices, not only in all their other sacred places, but particularly in the Grove of Andraste, their name for victory.
But the Romans also practiced sacrificial rites, unless you mean human sacrifice.
Breaking his entrenchments.
So this is the 9th Legion of which we hear so much, Harry.
Yes, but not all of it. The 9th is scattered about, and probably only 3 cohorts or battalions could be brought together. They rushed off towards Colchester and were probably ambushed. Horribly outnumbered, the legionaries would have been slaughtered. And once again, the cavalry got out. So about 2,000 men in all.
So, who are these men?
The 14th Legion, with the veterans of the 20th and the auxiliaries from the adjacent stations, having joined Suetonius, his army amounted to little less than 10,000 men. Thus reinforced, he resolved, without a loss of time, to bring on a decisive action. For this purpose he chose a spot encircled with woods, narrow at the entrance and sheltered in the rear by a thick forest. In that situation, he had no fear of an ambush. The enemy, he knew, had no approach but in front. An open plain lay before him.
He chose an excellent position with secure ranks, secure rear, secure flanks. No one could attack from the rear or the side. This narrow entrance negated the huge numerical superiority of the enemy, and perhaps also there was a bit of a back-to-wall mentality. fight here, boys, or we die.
So what sort of organisation did the British Army have, Howard?
Well, frankly, not a lot. They are really a huge army of individuals. They're very brave. Some have got lots of equipment and spears and swords, but they're no match, really, man for man, to the mechanical, machine-like army of the Romans. But they do outnumber them horribly, and that's possibly where their strength lies. But they do fight as individuals, and that's a problem.
The Britons brought into the field an incredible multitude. They formed no regular line of battle. Detached parties and loose battalions displayed their numbers in frantic transport, bounding with exultation, and so sure of victory that they placed their wives in wagons at the extremity of the plain.
And you can see them over to the left-hand side of the arena?
Where they might survey the scene of the action and behold the wonders of British valour.
Boudica, at the head of an army of about 230,000 men,
An exaggeration to get the size of the victory all the more impressive.
rode in a chariot herself and assigned the others to their several stations. Paulinus could not extend his line the whole length of hers, for even if the men had been drawn at only one deep, they would not have reached far enough, so inferior were they in numbers. Nor, on the other hand, did he dare to join battle in a single compact force, for fear of being surrounded and cut to pieces.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what you see before you is just the very centre of that beleaguered Roman front line. Facing a massacre, Suetonius Paulinus comes forward to rally his troops.
Suetonius, in a moment of such importance, did not remain silent. He expected everything from the valour of his men, and yet urged every topic that could inspire and animate them for the attack.
Ignore the din made by these barbarians and their empty threats. There are more women than men in their ranks. They are not soldiers, nor are they properly equipped. We have beaten them before, and when they see our weapons and our valour, they'll crack. Ah, what glory awaits you. That small plain will win renown of the whole army. Stick together, throw your javelins, strike forward with your shield bosses, then finish them off with your swords. Forget about booty. Go in and win, and you'll have the lot.
This speech was received with warlike acclamations. The soldiers burned with impatience from the onset. The veterans brandished their javelins and the ranks displayed intrepid countenances.
And Boudica was not to be outdone.
Terrifying all beholders, she spoke as follows.
Hear me now, O Andraste! I, Queen Boudica, pray to thee! Let us Britons ride to battle led by a mighty woman. We've done so before, and we shall do so again. But it's not as a woman of noble birth, but as one of the people that I'm avenging my lost freedom, my spoiled body, the outraged chastity of my daughters. Andraste! Let men decide if they will to live and be slaves. Freedom and vengeance is this woman's resolve.
Now these speeches, they're not the real words spoken at the time, are they?
Well, frankly, no, they're made up. It's all to add to the drama, really. The Romans were very, very fond of dramatic readings in their popular parties, and the more dramatic the better. So hence the making up of really good speeches, which may or may not have been said at the time.
Thereupon the armies approached each other, the barbarians with much shouting mingled with menacing battle songs, but the Romans silently and in order, until they came within a javelin's throw of the enemy.
Began. A Roman legion presented a close embodied line. The Britons advanced with ferocity and discharged their darts at random.
Now, as I said earlier, these warriors, although very brave, are individuals, so there's no real direction of their attack here, and they're up against an oiled military machine, the Panzer Division of the ancient world. So man for man, yes, they're giving a good account, but against a solid wall of shields and spears, they're not making any impact at the moment, despite their overwhelming numbers and those in reserve. You can see how the Romans are using their shields in an offensive as well as defensive manner. If you punch an enemy with the shield box, you can knock him down and stab him when he's on the ground. So this first attack has failed. Perhaps not pressed with great determination, it was a teasing attack to see if they could just chase the Romans away. It failed, and now Boudicca has to think again.
Dann kommt das alleine.
Now, the Britons are trying something else. They're bringing up their archers. If they can shoot at a distance, that negates the fact that they don't have any armour, and the fact that the Romans are heavily armoured. The Romans have to sit there and endure. What the archers are trying to do is to get the Romans to come out of their defensive position and break ranks and chase them. If they do that, the Roman army is lost. But Suetonius Paulinus knows this. He's an old hand, an experienced soldier. He hasn't been drawn, it hasn't worked. Round 2 to the Romans.
Had so successfully marshalled her forces previously, Howard, why is she now throwing it away with a charge like this?
Well, it could be several reasons. Firstly, she's really out of options. She has to beat the Romans in straight battle here. Maybe she's overconfident because of previous victories against the Romans. Or maybe the Romans have deliberately riled her, got her to throw away her troops in a rash way by cutting down the sacred grove, which was standard Roman psychological warfare. And it works. It obviously worked here because the Britons are throwing themselves en masse against the Roman shield wall, and they are not penetrating it. The Roman position is too strong. They can't get round the flanks, they can't attack it from the rear. They only have one option, to attack from the front, and that's really dangerous and difficult because they're coming up against a solid, disciplined lines of swords and shields. And again, the attack has failed.
Their groves, devoted to inhuman superstitions, were destroyed.
Now it's quite interesting talking about why the Romans would cut down the sacred grove. In fact, Romans were usually very tolerant of religions of those people that they assimilated. But there were 2 exceptions, the Judeans and the Druids. And that's because those religions weren't just a religious force, they were a political and possibly military force. And in Roman thinking that meant you had to stamp them out. And look at this, in go the Roman cavalry. The auxiliary cavalry coming into their own now, harrying the Britons as they return back to their line of wagons. This is what light cavalry is all about. Don't let the enemy stand. Break them, chase them, demoralise them.
The cavalry at the same time bore down upon the enemy, and with their spears and swords overpowered all who dared to make a stand.
Cavalry now return to the Roman line, having very successfully chased back the Britons. And Boudicca must now be worried because all her tactics have failed. The Romans think it's time to strike. They form a wedge.
And now the entire Roman army advances.
In that instant, the Romans rushed forward. In the form of that wedge, the auxiliaries followed with equal ardour.
When the clash came, they easily broke through the opposing ranks. But as they were surrounded by the great numbers of the enemy, they had to be fighting everywhere at once.
So this wedge, one of the most devastating Roman military tactics. It's so good, it's still used by a riot police today. Only this is far more deadly as they have swords, not truncheons. It cuts into the heart of an enemy. It allows a small force to penetrate a huge enemy army. And once you cut into their ranks, the ranks break. You attack from the sides, the rears. You kill, destroy, the enemy flee. The wedge is the devastating weapon of the Roman army, and now it's moving forward.
warriors to flight and their women and children who come along for a ringside seat at a resounding victory were put to the fire and the sword.
Finally, late in the day, the Romans prevailed, and they slew many in battle beside the wagons of the forest, and captured many alive. Nevertheless, not a few made their escape and prepared to fight again.
But they were horribly trapped.
The Britons betook themselves to flight, but their wagons in the rear obstructed their passage. A dreadful slaughter followed. Neither sex nor age was spared. The cattle, falling in one promiscuous carnage, added to the heaps of slain. The glory of the day was equal to the most splendid victory of ancient times. But according to some writers, not less than 80,000 Britons were put to the sword. The Romans lost about 400 men, and the wounded did not exceed that number.
Now these figures would have been exaggerated to make Suetonius Paulinus' victory all the more remarkable. Now in these very difficult circumstances, what can Boudica do? What has she left? Not many options.
Boudica, by a dose of poison, ended her life.
Boudica fell sick and died.
Is there any way of knowing, Howard?
Frankly, we don't know, but it's almost certain she did die. If she'd stayed alive, she would have rallied the tribes and fought back, I'm sure.
The Britons mourned Boudica deeply and gave her a costly burial. But feeling that now at last they were really defeated, they scattered to their homes.
Well now, those legions can take your applause, ladies and gentlemen, for a noble victory won. And as a remarkable byproduct, your applause also raises the British dead. Boudica, if you're on the right, coming up towards you now.
So, as I said, the Romans had to destroy the rebellion once and for all. And they did. They crushed it. They burnt. They killed. They destroyed. But later on there'll be a hint of reconciliation. The procurator realised that he can't extract taxes to a population that's entirely dead. So he did change his policy.
Nothing, however, distressed the enemy so much as famine, for they had been careless about sowing corn, the people of every age having gone to the war, while they reckoned on our supplies as their own.
Later, back to the reign of the Emperor Vespasian, ladies and gentlemen, the second half of the 1st century AD. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you please now give a big, big cheer for our Roman legionaries as they march onto our field. Ladies and gentlemen, the Imperial Roman Army! See our troops here led by the Centurion. He leads these legionaries and auxiliary troops onto our display field. The steady steps of the Roman soldiers in their iron-shod sandals. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, will you please give a big round of applause for our Imperial Roman troops. I'm now going to hand the microphone over to our commentator for this event, our Centurion from the Roman Legion.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a display by the Ermine Street Guard, the Gamma Project from Holland, and the group from Exeter called the Isca Contaburnum. The Ermine Street Guard was formed 32 years ago with the aim to research into the Roman army and to reconstruct Roman armour and equipment. The Roman armour and equipment you see in front of you is that of the second half of the 1st century AD, therefore applicable to Britain, because the invasion was started in 43 AD. We're going to have a closer look at the ranks and of the various soldiers. We get to the central point and distribute themselves. The bulk of the column is made up of Roman legionary soldiers. Roman legionary soldiers recruited in the Roman army for a period of 25 years. At the end of that 25 years, or during that 25 years, they weren't allowed to make legal marriages. And in fact, if they were married when they joined the army, the actual process of enlisting into the army was an automatic form of divorce. So we all take male recruits. Have a closer look at the equipment of the legionary soldier now. You can see first of all they've got these large helmets to protect their heads, cheek pieces either side the face, and a big neck guard at the back of the helmet to protect the back of the neck. There's also a reinforcement on the front to take sword blows onto the front of their helmet. They wear body armour. Most of them are wearing a body armour that's made of strips of metal, which are joined inside on leather straps, and this makes the armour flexible and quite easy for the soldier to move inside. And the weight of one of these is 10 kilos. Around the bottom plates of the armour there's a military belt. This military belt, you can see, is a leather belt with metal plates riveted to it. And at the front of the belt there's an apron, supposedly for the protection of the lower stomach and private parts, but I can tell you this is more psychological than practical. In fact, if you're running it can be a damn nuisance. On the feet they got very tough leather sandals. These are more like a boot really. And if you look in the bottoms of the sandals, numerous hobnails protect the leather and stop the leather from being worn away. They carry a large shield which is made of thin layers of wood glued in this curved shape. The shield is then covered in linen or leather and the design painted directly onto the front. And the design on the shield probably shows us the legion that the men have come from. In the centre of the shield there's a large metal boss to protect the single hand that they use to carry and manoeuvre the shield. They've got 3 weapons. First of all, they have a javelin. Those of you who saw the battle this morning, we weren't able to throw these javelins during the battle. We couldn't think of a way that, first of all, wouldn't be dangerous, and secondly, wouldn't have looked silly. But before we'd have joined in battle with those Celts this morning, you would have got volleys of these javelins being thrown. You just think about that, what this would have done to the Celtic army, volleys of these javelins. So they throw their javelins, they then draw their short stabbing swords, these stabbing and thrusting swords. They don't wave these swords about in the air, they keep them nice and tight to the body, stabbing and thrusting as you saw us in that battle this morning. And finally on the left side they would carry their short soldiers. The Romans also recruited people from the tribes and provinces that had come into their empire. Some of those Celts that fought the Romans would then be recruited into the Roman army, and they would be what we call auxiliary soldiers. And the word auxiliary in Latin means helper. So these, if you like, help the big legions. A legion, which the legionaries was in, was 5,300 men. These soldiers were in smaller regiments of either 500 or 800 men. And the auxiliaries served for 25 years and were given Roman citizenship at the end of their 25 years' service. Their equipment is less elaborate than the legionaries. Simple bronze helmets, mail shirts, double belts support their swords and daggers. And they've got a flat oval shield more suitable for skirmishing. And in this case they're carrying a stabbing spear. They're not going to throw this spear, they're going to stab you with it and retain the weapon to stab the next enemy. We also got 2 here with their marching packs on. Just as soldiers, when they get on their planes to go across to Iraq with their big burgans on their back, everything they're going to need on campaign, so the Roman soldier was expected to carry his equipment on the march. You can see these blokes have got a spare pair of sandals, they've got a blanket, they've got 3 days supply of food, bits and pieces they're going to need around the camp, etc., etc., letters from the girlfriend, etc., all the little small things that a soldier needs on campaign. And you can see their shields as well are covered with leather coverings to protect the design on the front. Now attached to the century, and I forgot to say that the century in the Roman army at this time is 80 men and not 100. Attached to the century you would have various officers. And first of all we have coming down a chap called a signifer. He carries a standard which is a sign to the men to show them their own standard to follow, and each one of these would be slightly different, so each group of 80 men would know their own standard. And we can see that the standard bearer wears an animal skin to make himself look more important. In this case, the gentleman in the front here has got a bear skin, a European brown bear over his helmet. He's also equipped with a type of armour made of scales, small little scales like the scales of a fish. Following him is a chap who carries a face. This is the face of the emperor, so that the soldiers knew what the emperor looked like. And this particular face is the Emperor Vespasian, who came to the throne in 69 AD. The chap behind him is a cornican who carries a large circular horn called a cornu. And this is used to relay commands in battle and on the march. The chap just by me now carries a flag called a vexillum. And this vexillum shows you the legion that we've come from. And if we look at this flag, we can see it's the 20th Legion, and the emblem of that legion is a wild boar. And this legion is one of the legions that took part in the invasion of Britain and also took part in the destruction, the defeat of Boudica. This legion then remained in this country until well into the 3rd century AD. Now I'm going to bring on some more auxiliaries, but these auxiliary soldiers are mounted. just strolling onto the field, as you can see. And what a sight they make. Auxiliary cavalry are non-Roman citizen soldiers again. They would get their Roman citizenship after 25 years service. Now we'll have a bit of a look at their equipment. Both got quite decorative helmets. One's got a plume on his helmet. They've got mail shirts. They're wearing short trousers called braque to protect their legs. You can see the horses as well are decorated now. I've done too much decorating at home, you see. Horses are decorated, as you can see, with pendants at the front and the back of the horse, and we find these very, very often on Roman military sites, and you find them in many Roman museums. With regards to weapons, you can see they've got a stabbing spear, first of all. They can stab down at the enemy with these spears. And then they've got long slashing swords. And as you saw in the battle this morning, or if you didn't see the battle, cavalry come into their own when the enemy break and run. That's when you can get cavalry in amongst them to draw their short swords and cut down at the enemy as they're running away. And here you can see the second rider. He's got his long slashing sword ready to cut down at the enemy. Now the most peculiar thing about Roman cavalry, if you've not already noticed, these men are riding with no stirrups. And you might say, well, he's riding with no stirrups, he's not going to be very effective. How does he stay on the horse? How does he stab and thrust on a horse without stirrups? If you look closely, you can see they've both got saddles which have got a horn in each corner of the saddle. Just like a big Western saddle, which is almost like a seat, if you like. These saddles keep you firmly seated upon the horse. You can cut and thrust using the saddle. You can see there's two horns at the front of the saddle and two horns behind as the rider goes by, and that makes him very effective. In fact, you find that the stirrups didn't come into use until they came into use in about the 4th and 5th century AD. We're now going to show you some training of the Roman cavalry horses. Obviously, a horse's natural instinct is not to go at a man. Don't particularly like going at a man. You have to train them to do this. And we're going to now show you how we would need to train a horse to get it ready for battle and get it ready to go at people. First of all, we're going to have a pass with the hasta, the stabbing spear. Imagine you're standing there as some poor little Celt, and this man comes bearing down on you with this spear. This one's being used overhand. Yeah, go on, you can clap. I know some of you want to. Now they're using throwing darts, look. I'll just remind you of the skill of these men, because we find it difficult to get riders to do this. We get people who say they can ride horses, they do it once and they never come back again. It takes a lot of skill to use this without stirrups to do these manoeuvres. Now these Celtic heads are being shot. Now imagine that with somebody's head. Anybody need a haircut? Just come and stand on the field. Now we've got the horses used to going at targets. We're not going to introduce a human element. We're going to put this volunteer who annoyed me greatly last night. We're going to stick him in the middle of the field, and he's going to help these horses get used to attacking a man. Our man standing here very bravely. Oh, I think he's had enough time. Give a round of applause for our volunteer who stood in the middle. I'm now going to hand the microphone over to my colleague. We're going to now show you some Roman army manoeuvres, some battle formations. The two words that come to mind at what made the Roman army so successful, and makes any army so successful, is organisation and discipline, and this is how they won the day, very often when they were outnumbered.
As the Centurio just told you, the big difference between the Celtic armies and the Roman armies was the discipline, was the training, which we've just given you a small glimpse of. The Roman army was a volunteer army. These men were signed up from the farms or from the suburbs and had to be turned into soldiers. Once that had been done, and they'd been equipped to this high standard, they were sent out to fight in all corners of the province, all corners of the empire. In 43 AD, it was the turn of Britannia. 4 legions came over. For 20 years, they were pinned in the southeast corner of Britain, partly by the Boudiccan revolt. But at this moment, in 70 AD, the legions were once again on the move. And at this moment, I require your imagination. This is the Roman army, and you must be the Celtic army. Where it gets terribly interactive. You're a group of people. You're farmers generally, you don't have proper towns. Your allegiance is to your kings. You've been called to fight. Bring what you have with you. You're not equipped. These men have their armour provided, but you bring what you have. Some knives, spears, even agricultural implements. And you're facing this well-disciplined, well-oiled fighting machine. This formation is the famous tortoise. It's not a battle formation, it's more of a siege formation. You can see the shield interlocked like a tiled roof. The idea is to allow the men to approach a wall or fortification. The defenders can hurl stones upon them, can throw down spears, and it'll all just bounce off. In fact, they used to run chariots across these formations to show how strong they were. The only effective defence was boiling oil or water, and that takes time to get together and a lot of organisation. That's worth a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. You nearly all fall over. You're very lucky today. So the legions are moving through Britain in 70 AD. You've been summoned by your chiefs. You do not have that discipline. You just gathered in a crowd. Individually, many of you are extremely brave, very proud warriors. Some of you have excellent weapons, but few of you. But you cannot rely on the man next to you. You probably don't know him. You don't have a discipline. You haven't been drilled to depend on each other, be able to depend on each other. You're facing this ironclad, silent army. The Celts are very noisy. They would shout. They would turn the battle into a pageant almost, of shouting and showing off. But here you're facing this silent army that obeys orders, stays in step, has these extraordinary formations. This one is probably the most famous of all. It's the cunium, the wedge, known as the hog's head. Remember, you're the army, the Celtic army, you're facing this. You don't know what's going to happen. You've never seen people fight like this before. The shields, the drums try and intimidate you. Even I'm getting out of the way. The soldiers have driven the Celtic army from the field. They don't chase after them. That leaves them open to a counter-attack. They reform. Although discipline was probably the greatest weapon of the Roman army, that's one of their great technological advantages. And this is artillery. The Romans didn't invent artillery, that was the Greeks. It came from the fact that they were using bows, which they tried to make stronger and stronger to go further and further. But eventually, these bows were too strong to pull back. And they invented winch systems that would draw them back. And all of these weapons you're about to see use power from a twist of rope. There's no bending of the arms here. They're not bows, not like crossbows. They don't have the strength, doesn't come from the wood. It comes from twists of rope. You have three main weapons in front of you. The far side of the field, the smaller weapon, is a catapulta. It shoots bolts like large arrows. In the centre is the ballista, which is a stone thrower. And nearest to the crowd is the onager. This is also a siege weapon. To appreciate these, you have to think of them being used en masse. The catapulta, there was one to every century, which meant about 60 to a legion. These could lay down shots of one every 10 seconds. And that would decimate the enemy, who had nothing to reply with. Only slingshots, which just didn't have the range. The catapulta will be firing at these wooden targets in the centre of the field. As you can see, it's very portable. It can be picked up and moved around by just one man. Sometimes these were mounted on the backs of carts to be used as a mobile artillery to rain down these bolts on the enemy. Each of these weapons has to be winched back, such as their strength. This takes a little time. The ballista is about to shoot for the first time, aiming at the targets as well. A little short, that one. We also have two archers. Although they had artillery, they did not abandon archers. In fact, every Roman soldier was trained to use a bow. Look at that.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Been much of a day today, but I'm sure each of those arrows was a ranging shot. Of course, it's down to me to behold just how difficult this is. But in all fairness, I've done it myself, and it really does take some doing. The first of our riders again, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Jane on Africano.
Oh.
He won't be happy with that. And our next rider, Stacey Evans on Stoneleigh presumably will go a little bit closer to his target. Go on, cheer him on. The louder you cheer, the faster he goes. Right, I can say that Arthur himself is looking unimpressed with the performance of his troops. Johnny Lee on Tom, about to go, coming in. Yes! However, although the target would on a 5th century battlefield be even bigger, I can see that Arthur himself is unimpressed and wants to demonstrate to his lads how it's done. Ladies and gentlemen, cheer him on! Oh! It's nuts! Yes! Honour avenged as Stacey Evans shows how it's done. Johnny Lee determined to try his arm again. Yes! How do you cheer, the faster he goes. Yes! And some... Did you enjoy that? But it was only as a result of this program and experimentation on horseback that we were able to get it right. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together if you would for the Romano British Army of King Arthur! So my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Right hand up. Do you promise to serve the King for the duration of the war? Now a soldier. We'll be back here at 10 o'clock tonight. Alright, we'll do a bit of training for you, alright? You'll go on the train then. You next? Alright? It's interesting how many people from Richmond see us here. People went to Sassar. People forget your name. That's right. Back then, I can't remember the judge and he kept telling yours. Yeah. Anyway, here we are.
And these gentlemen here, the German Imperial Army, began their march again across Belgium, hoping in one decisive blow to crush and destroy the French army. They knew that the left flank of the French army left a gap between France and the sea. And a General von Schlieffen had devised a plan by which the German army, in a massive swinging right hook, could crash through Belgium, crash through northern France, and with the right sleeve of the right-hand man brushing the channel, could march into France, swing behind Paris, and end the war in a matter of weeks. It was a very, very good plan. It had many factors in its favour. The Germans had overwhelming superiority, 3 million men mobilised, some on the eastern front, some on the western front. They had, however, reckoned without one thing: the quick and immaculately carried out mobilisation and deployment of the British Army. The British Army in 1914, unlike the rest of Europe, was not a conscript army. The British Army was a professional army. It existed in a form that allowed it to deploy 100,000 men in the field and protect its empire. It was put together through experience.
The equipment that they carry is a miracle of modern engineering. This is webbing. It's cotton material and can be put on and taken off like a vest. On it you can carry 150 rounds of ammunition, all your clothes, your entrenching tool, your water, and all of your necessaries. It is the height of design in 1914. This is the most modern army that we have ever put into action. And each man carries the short magazine, the Enfield. This is a bolt action rifle. You all have garden gates with bolts on. On these rifles, when you open the bolt, it allows a bullet into the chamber. When you close the bolt, it pushes the bullet home and cocks the weapon, so you can fire it when you pull the trigger. But for 1 or 2 wounded and a pile of smoking cartridge cases. All of these things the British Army had learnt from the Boers. And throughout the summer, a summer very much like this, a very hot summer of 1914, the British Army fought its way to call upon its territorials. Now the territorials were designed for home defence. They were part-time. There were men who had a different outlook on life. The BEF, the regulars, were hardened men. When you read their diaries, they don't have any sympathy, emotion or fear to have a look at. One thing I want you to recognise is the use of motorised transport. The British Army was very quick at using new ideas and new innovations. Each battalion's bandsman would become its own stretcher bearers. They would be responsible for removal of the casualties from the field, and they would evacuate sick men with a great deal of efficiency. And you can see here our ambulance crew quickly getting out their stretcher, opening it up and preparing to move their wounded comrade onto it. Now the vehicle that they're driving, just out of interest and to satisfy your curiosity, is a Ford Model T. It has been modified slightly. Mr. Ford only ever made it in black. This one has been painted with the Army service colours and bears the large Red Cross roundel that's meant to secure it from enemy fire. It's a very
effective ambulance. It has relatively good suspension. But as you can see, the effort of loading a casualty is quite difficult, and you also have the added difficulty of the vehicle not being quite long enough. It is, however, better than a jolting horse cart. And the speed with which the casualty could be evacuated was quite phenomenal. Now, another element of technology that we are demonstrating to you here is, again, rather than technology dedicated towards saving life, is new technology dedicated to taking life. The Vickers machine gun. Now, the Vickers machine gun, like all machine guns, fires around 450 rounds a minute. It can be cranked up in an emergency to fire up to 600 rounds, and it is an effective killing machine. Each British battalion in 1916 would have 4 of these dedicated to it. The Germans would have 2 to 3 times as many. And in the summer of 1916, a new type of army was about to face machine guns. That is, the volunteer army, the Kitchener's men, men who were pals, men that lived in the same street, worked in the same factories, were related by marriage, who knew each other from the cradle. And these men joined up basically to serve with the friends and the people that they knew. And the first time that they faced fire was really at the Battle of the Somme on the 1st of July 1916. And because they were new and relatively inexperienced, the plan was kept very simple. The German trenches would be bombarded heavily for a week, and the British troops would be able to walk over the top and occupy the German positions. They found that there were 1 or 2 problems with this. First of all, the German trenches had not been destroyed. The German wire protecting the trenches had not been cut. The bombardment had not nearly been effective enough, and the German machine gunners were sheltering 40 feet below ground. And when the German machine guns set up and opened up on the British troops, around 50 rounds per square yard were falling on them. That is 50 rounds for every yard of ground you have to cover. The slaughter was phenomenal. 20,000 men were killed, 60,000 casualties in total, all of which occurred really in the first few minutes of the action as the men got out of the trenches and attempted to walk towards the German lines in wave after wave. They did effectively destroy the Austrian army and take them out of the war. They were left, however, with a number of problems. They were left with the problem that at home their economy could not sustain so many men in the field. It was left with problems of political agitation at home. It was left with a society that could not sustain a prolonged war despite the efforts of the Russian army. And what I would point out to you here, you can see several female soldiers here, and I would point out to you, unlike the West, the Russian army did have female soldiers. It had women's battalions. And you see them wearing a variety of uniforms here, and carrying a whole series of different weapons.
What are they supposed to do? What are they pretending to do?
However, after 1916, the Russians could not sustain this effort, and within a year of their victories and Brusilov's great successes, they collapsed into revolution. The difficulty of a wiring party, particularly at night, is that you're seen. Now that's why you come out in the dark. However, your enemy will be watching and listening, and supported by light machine guns, and using the advantage of every cover in the ground, not like the men of 1914 who marched straight towards the British guns. These men were trained to advance in short bursts over ground that was broken by shell fire. They were expecting to advance behind rapid barrages. Their equipment had been modified to deal with this. They had got rid of the large, heavy, cumbersome packs that they carried. Their pickle halbs had been dispensed with. They now wore the Stahlhelm. Their uniforms were much simpler, less bright, and their equipment had been lightened and modified to allow for the ease of movement. In fact, when they attacked the British Fourth Army and drove it back towards the sea, the German army suffered from only one defect. Its men, when they stopped to see British trenches, were amazed at the amount of food and material that they contained. The first wave consists of men who have hand grenades and bayonets. These are referred lovingly as your bombers and bayonet men. Now these men are there to detect the enemy, to pin the enemy down, and to eventually pour fire on him that allows you to overcome him. Behind them comes the support line. Men carrying the Lewis light machine gun with its distinctive round drum at the top. Men carrying rifle grenades. And behind them, a small third line of bayonet men. These are the men that are there as the moppers up. These are the men who will go into the German dugouts and winkle them out at the point of the bayonet. They seem to have spotted a target. The sergeant is just moving his light machine gun into a position where he can bring fire down on his target. The Lance Corporal directs his section to pour fire down on the German parapet. The Vickers heavy machine gun from the support line would be also pouring fire down onto the German trenches, causing them to keep their heads down. The whole effort is not to necessarily kill the enemy, but to pin him down, to stop him from moving and not allow him to fire back at you. The sergeant moves his men forward. The rifle grenadier fires grenades, again to pin the Germans down in their position, and the whole is allowed to move forward until it gets into a position where it is ready to launch its final attack on the German bunker or trench. Again, more rounds are poured onto the German position. The rifle grenade is fired at a shorter range again, hoping to lob grenades into the German trenches. And the sergeant now brings his rear line, his moppers up, to join up and engage in the final attack. And with him he will collect the bomber, the man with the hand grenades who has the ability to bomb the German dugouts or trench system. The men cover him as he goes in. All of this effort has been to get him close enough. And then finally, the bayonet men go in to launch an attack on the German position. Any Germans that don't surrender at this stage are liable to find themselves in deep trouble. Round of applause for that, I think, ladies and gentlemen.